3% community. Congratulations, 10 years. I just want to express my gratitude and admiration to Kat Gordon for her vision and say how truly honored I am to be part of this conference, and so honored that you, whoever you are, chose this talk. And I so wish that I could ask each and every one of you why and what brought you here. And hopefully we'll be able to be in touch in some way through this conference or through email, and I can actually hear from you. So this talk, going to be very transparent, is one long invitation, if you will. My name is Felise Nguyen, and I am a circle keeper, a mediator, a restorative justice practitioner. I'm also a survivor of sexual abuse, and I'm many, many other things, but those are some of the relevant ways that I am showing up here today. And I am here to invite you to join me and an organization called the Restorative Justice Initiative and Kat Gordon and other people, caring and courageous people within the 3% community, in an endeavor that has not been done before. So I'm going to start sharing my screen, and please bear with me. A restorative justice approach to sexual harm in the workplace. What if Me Too could include everyone? This is something that I have to tell you has no guarantee of succeeding, and there's no obvious financial or material benefit or reward to doing this. In fact, I can guarantee that if you decide to come along, we will get lost a lot, we will fail a lot, we will feel lots of feelings, challenging ones, and we'll end up with a lot more questions than we do answers. I know this isn't a great pitch, but this isn't actually a pitch. I'm not trying to convince you of anything. It really is an invitation that if it speaks to your heart, you will respond. Because in addition to all of the challenges that a restorative justice approach to sexual harm will entail, I also believe that we can do a lot of healing together and quite possibly do something to change the world. This is a quote from Margaret Mead that has always inspired me, and I hope it inspires you, and it is part of the invitation of this talk. So you may or may not have heard the term restorative justice before. If you have not, I'm going to play a little video in which Laura Dern says a word about it.
Many of us were taught not to tattle. It was a culture of silencing, and that was normalized. I urge all of us to not only support survivors and bystanders who are brave enough to tell their truth, but to promote restorative justice.
So that was Laura Dern. You may have heard a lot of other survivors talk about restorative justice. And I will be giving some definitions and some information and sharing stories as well. But what it basically boils down to is the description that I shared of what this talk would be, this long series of questions. The central question for me, for this project that I'm inviting you to take part in, and of restorative justice, was this: what if we created communities that were safe enough, um, and had enough trust and respect, where we could say to each other, me too, I was harmed, and I want to heal, and I want to do it in community. Me too, I've harmed someone, and I truly want to understand how that impacted that person. I want to understand what I did, and I want to take complete and full accountability and make amends to that person and to the community that I harmed. Me too, I have stood by while someone else was hurt and I wasn't able to do anything, but I don't want to be a bystander anymore. So if you fall into any of those three categories or any other category that I haven't specifically mentioned, but these questions speak to you, I urge you to email me, and I invite you to share your story with me confidentially, whatever you feel comfortable with. So Kat Gordon wrote in the 3% August newsletter that the Restorative Justice Initiative, an organization I'm a part of, and 3% are partnering on what we hope will be a history-making pilot project. And right now, we're in the early stages, and we're here to ask this community to see if there are enough people here who want to do this, who need to do this, who are committed to trying to see if a restorative justice approach, specifically a community-based approach, could work in the sexual harassment workplace context, or any gender-based harm. Restorative justice has been applied as part of the criminal legal system, part of the juvenile legal system. It's been applied as a complete alternative to those systems. It's been used in prisons, in schools, in college campuses, in social justice contexts. It's even been used to deal with crimes against humanity in the national context, as in the case of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa in the 90s and 2000s. But there has actually been very, very little restorative justice work done in the workplace context. And with the advent of Me Too, it feels as though this may be the moment to enter into that arena. So I'm going to share my screen again. This was an article in the Harvard Business Review last year. It reported on a study of 800 US companies that included about over 8 million employees. And it's a very interesting article. Highly suggest people to take a look at it. One statistic that I will pull out is that of the people surveyed, 40% of women and 16% of men said that they had been sexually harassed at work. And that number, 40% and 16%, hasn't really changed since the 1980s. Since the 1980s, there's been a lot of changes in the law. Title VII liability, internal HR procedures and reporting and trainings, and now diversity, equity, and inclusion departments. And the fact that that experience hasn't changed that much tells us that we need more. We need more. And even now, with the advent of people being able to speak on social media and taking it to the court of public opinion, it seems that still the dent in the experience of sexual harassment in the workplace hasn't changed that much. And we would love to see the advertising industry be the first to try and respond to the demands of the Me Too movement with something more than a Band-Aid or an optics ploy or a shield against liability, something that is grassroots, bottom up, community-based. So this is a piece, a great piece that hopefully some of you have read. Zoe Skaman published this earlier this summer on Substack. And there's so much there that that makes me think that advertising is a great industry to bring restorative justice to. So I don't need to tell you, but advertising is a notoriously bro culture industry. There are other industries as well, but it is well known, and there's so many stories in this article and in other places. I'm sure you know better than me about the culture that exists. And at the same time, the advertising industry is full of bold people, creative people, innovators, and people who are being paid well and skilled and talented and gifted at using your imagination and storytelling. And these are all aspects that are crucial to restorative justice, which I'll get into more later. Another reason advertising is an industry that we would like to work with is advertising shapes culture. And we know that sexual harm, sexual harassment is an issue of culture as much as anything else. And the cost of the advertising industry not changing is detrimental to all of us, because that culture that's within the industry is the culture that is being perpetuated by the work that you put out into the world. And conversely, if we are able to make an intervention in this industry together, a culture change is started and seeded and takes root, then the ripple effects are also tremendous. Positive ripple effects are tremendous. So we're in a space between stories. That's a phrase from Charles Eisenstein. The old paradigm is crumbling. The new paradigm is still being written by us now, and we're living in that time in between. And so who better than the advertising industry to take a big role in the restorative justice movement, to communicate about what restorative justice could be, and spread it into the world. So Zoe Skaman's article expresses this basic insight that the numbers show one thing: the numbers of progress, the numbers of women in agency leadership, the number of female creative directors, the narrowing pay gap. These are all fantastic achievements. 3% movement over 10 years of hard work have done so much to move the industry. And behind that, behind those numbers, there still remains a culture of dehumanization and objectification and degradation. And the impact on people hasn't changed as much as the numbers have changed. And in some ways, the impact is even more damaging and abusive now that there are people in positions of power who say very, very woke things in public, and behind that, they walk a very different walk. And the effects on women, people of color, other marginalized people remains, or even is getting worse. And I'll just take a moment to speak to the intersection of sexism and racism and ableism and all the isms that are part of the power dynamics that exist and the abuses of power, and taking on a restorative approach to Me Too must also look at all the intersections. So what Zoe Scaman says is that there is now what she calls an insidious misogyny, and that the misogyny is now less visible and less tangible. It sounds like from those stories it's actually quite visible, but it's less measurable. And so she asks, how can we fix something which we can't see or measure? So my response to that is restorative justice, although I would rephrase the question. It's not about fixing something. And I think that the contrast between allopathic medicine and holistic medicine is very similar to our conventional approach to justice and the restorative approach to justice. So this is a iceberg, and I stole this slide from the internet. This is an illustration of the difference between the conventional allopathic approach to medicine, which focuses on the tip of the iceberg, focuses on the disease and on the symptoms and trying to fix them and get rid of them or reduce them. And holistic medicine looks at the deeper underlying causes and looks at the entire health of the system, and for example, where the immune system might be weak, and strengthening the immune system so that the immune system can do its job to keep the body healthy and in balance. So to me, this is the analogy between conventional approaches and restorative approaches to what we do when we see on certain measures at the top some inequalities being reduced, but the underlying causes haven't really been addressed. In physical health, in the physical medicine world, we know that as sort of like taking a pill to deal with one symptom, but then they're being created side effects, right? So holistic medicine and restorative justice are more about looking at healing and health, and I suggest that while laws and policies and the mandatory trainings and the firings and the half-hearted apologies and the DEI statements and departments and the whisper networks, while these are all important, they aren't enough. They aren't enough to get us where we want to go. They aren't enough to really move that 40% number, 40% and 16% number that the Harvard Business Review reported. Because the underlying causes of sexual harassment are, in my view, coming from disconnection and dehumanization. And so the restorative approach, which seeks to bring us into connection, is really necessary if what we want is respect and dignity and good relationship with each other. It's not that we only want sexual harassment not to happen. It's that we want workplaces that support and celebrate each other and have creative and beautiful relationships. So there's some reason to think that a restorative justice could help, and I'm going to share just a couple of statistics. There's been some research was done in 2007 and then looked at again in 2014 of 36 studies comparing restorative justice and criminal justice. And this study found that restorative justice reduced recidivism, reduced the reoffense of violent crime. And for victims who took part, they were better able to deal with trauma. They had less anxiety about being victimized again. They had less fear about crime in general and less anger about what happened to them. There was a program in Arizona called the Restore program, and it was in 2013. And this study looked at restorative justice applied specifically to sexual crimes. And that study also found that survivors had decreased PTSD as measured by the post-traumatic syndrome scale, and that over 90% of the survivors who participated said that they felt satisfied by the process. It's very different numbers than for conventional approaches. So what is RJ? I am going to share a little bit about my own personal story about how I came to RJ, and also a short snippet of a film, because I think that that's probably the best way to share with you what it is, to at least introduce you to what it is. And storytelling is an absolutely essential component of restorative justice. And again, I'll keep circling back to that. But I will let you know that some of what I'm about to share could be activating, triggering, could cause discomfort and pain. And so please take care of yourself. If you need to stop or step away or have a drink of water, or remind yourself that you're in your body and here and present and safe, or taking care of yourself means choosing not to listen to what I'm about to share, which involves childhood sexual abuse. But if you do feel able to listen, then hopefully what I will share will be more helpful than any kind of definition I could give you or description about restorative justice. So, but I will do that as well a little later. But I came to restorative justice through my own healing journey, as I was healing from trauma from childhood sexual abuse, which I started to realize was the impact that it had on me in my mid-30s. And I got to a place where I realized that I wanted to heal my relationship with my mother, that was the next phase of my healing. My abuse had happened between my grandfather and I, and he had passed away when I was 10. So I found an organization called Hidden Water, and they are a restorative justice approach using circles to help families who have been affected by childhood sexual abuse. And so I come from a very personal experience of healing and reconciliation and forgiveness through the work of being in these circles, and then later being trained and facilitating these circles. Hidden Water was in part inspired by a community in Canada called Hollow Water. And I'm going to show you a small snippet of this documentary that tells a little bit of that story. And
for me, I didn't really realize that was sexual abuse what I was doing to my children, because it was going on in the community, the little community of Longbody. I looked at it, it was like a game, because everybody else was doing it in the community.
The eastern shores of Lake Winnipeg in central Manitoba. Beautiful, peaceful, an ideal place to call home. But in this community, home has been a nightmare, especially for children. A place where secrets and silence imprisoned young and old alike. Hollow Water is an Ojibwe reserve, 200 kilometers north of Winnipeg. 450 people live here. 2/3 of them are the victims of sexual abuse. The offenders are grandparents, mothers, fathers, aunts, uncles, cousins. Few in the community have escaped the pain of this betrayal, and for decades they've kept it buried.
We couldn't just work with the victim, we also had to work with the offender, because we felt that the offender was the core of the problem. And to deal with victims alone, as is done in society, and not dealing with the offender, you're only dealing with half the problem. So it really helped us see the total picture. And not only individuals, but we also had to work with the families of both.
Richard and Deborah Kennedy were accused of sexually abusing 2 of their 5 children. By law, they were the responsibility of the Manitoba justice system. But that approach hadn't stopped abuse in the past, nor had it rehabilitated anyone. If Hollow Water couldn't find a way to make the couple admit their guilt, they would be returned to the courts. It was a bold step and not without risk, but the Crown Attorney's office agreed. Richard and Deb were given a 2-year probation.
I fell into that the denial system. I told people that the charges weren't true. I even lied to myself, saying that they weren't true.
I understood why my children were taken. With my charges, but it was very hard to believe my husband's charges.
I tried to find a way to come out of that and tell the truth. And the more I thought about it, the more lies I picked up.
All of you know the fear of talking, coming into the group.
There were more than the Kennedys needing help. The community lacked counselors. Workshops and training programs were held, and the women of Hollow Water were the first to sign up.
We want to help them. We don't believe in jail because they don't get no help in jail. The way we see jail system is, sure, they'll go to jail. Sure, people see us as punishment, but we don't see it that way. That's not punishment, because they go in there and nothing happens in there, and they just get angry, and they come back to the community and do the same thing over again. So that cycle just continues. And what we're trying to do is to stop that cycle, to start helping these people that we believe in healing. I believe in healing. I believe they can heal.
What really changed my denial was they had this men's group in Hollow Water. They've already started, and they sat me in there. And I've sat with some offenders, and that's the day I felt I wasn't alone.
It was a pain passed on from generation to generation.
So that's a documentary that you can watch the entirety of. It's available online. It's called Hollow Water, and it has been an incredible inspiration to me that that community was able to do what they did. Eventually, those parents, I think over the course of 5 years, were able to safely have their children returned to them. And the community stayed involved, and the healing reverberated far beyond that one family and throughout the entire community. So now I'm going to move a little more into some didactic sharing to try to answer the question of what is restorative justice, and taking a quote from Howard Zehr, that restorative justice is a compass and not a map. And that is to say that restorative justice is an instrument, is a tool, and it helps direct us towards a North Star, which are the principles of restorative justice. But there's no clear path to it, and it's different for everyone, every community, every family, every organization, school that engages with this. So that's something that should be understood, and restorative justice is an interesting combination of being very, very, very new, as some people say that it really didn't begin as the movement that we understand it today until the late 1970s. Some people say the 50s, but in any case, fairly new. And at the same time, others argue that it's very, 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 very old, because what we practice as restorative justice comes very, very much from indigenous practices from around the world. And I'll just name a few that I'm aware of: the Chiglit and Taglish people of Canada, the Maori of New Zealand. And in many ways, it is the understanding of a lot of people that the principles and practices of restorative justice is actually how people have responded to harm and to hurt for most of our human experience. And what is considered conventional justice now, that is actually very, very new. So, as I said, restorative justice is evolving. There's no one definition or practice or model. It's not a technique or a formula, because there's no silver bullet to real healing. Again, the allopathic versus holistic approach. Can't just take a pill or do this process and make your problem go away. So I'm going to share three, and there are many, many more definitions out there, but just three that have meant something to me in my practice. This is from Howard Zehr, who's considered one of the very early founders of the practice in this country. He says, restorative justice is a process to involve, to the extent possible, those who have a stake in a specific offense, and to collectively identify and address harms, needs, and obligations in order to heal and put things as right as possible. This is from a younger restorative justice practitioner, Jasmine Story. She is part of an organization called the People's Coalition, and also, I believe, a consulting firm called Honeybee. She says, restorative justice utilizes storytelling to name the impact of the harm, acknowledge needs, and imagine solutions tailored to the needs and obligations within the community. So again, storytelling is an essential component to restorative justice. Thinking to Zoe Scamon's piece when she says that misogyny is invisible now, restorative justice is a way that we can create space for telling our stories and hearing those stories and being witnessed in those stories. And through that storytelling, the invisible is made visible. This is a definition from the founder of an organization called Amplify RJ, another even younger restorative justice practitioner. There's many new generations of restorative justice facilitators. And he says, restorative justice is a philosophy and set of practices rooted in indigenous teachings that emphasize our interconnection by repairing relationships when harm occurs, while proactively building and maintaining relationships to prevent future harm. This definition particularly resonates with me because for me, restorative justice actually is more than a set of practices. It really is a whole way of life, a whole way of seeing the world, of being in the world, that is about the interconnection of everyone and everything, that every harm is deeply interconnected with its healing, and the interconnection of myself as a survivor and the perpetrators of abuse, and that what it means to be alive and to have a rich life means being in relationship and having mutual obligation and need for one another. And that having that kind of worldview means investing in and understanding the importance of proactively building and nurturing relationships, just as you would a garden that you need to water and give sunlight to and weed and fertilize. And not only to prevent that garden from being overrun with disease, preventing future harm, but I would add to this also to seed the fruits and the flowers, that can come from having a world and communities of healthy relationships where we respect each other and we understand each other, and we're constantly learning to do that better and deeper, and where our human dignity is supported and celebrated. So this is a attempt to contrast what we would call a conventional approach with a restorative approach. And so I'm just going to walk through, try to do this as quickly as I can, through how sexual harassment plays out even in an ideal situation in the current conventional approach. So taking a story from Zoe Scamon's piece, one of the anonymous contributors wrote, I was 26 at an agency party. I left the main office to go to the loo. Barring my way was a senior producer. He leered at me and said he'd only move and let me in if I let him snort a line off of my breasts. I laughed. He didn't. So something like that takes place. And the conventional approach, the way it's looked at is there was a policy of the company, a sexual harassment policy, that probably you all had to read and sign at some point. And that was put in place to help the company to abide by the laws against sexual harassment that they would be responsible for. So something like that could be considered a violation of that policy. And the next thing that would happen is that this 26-year-old woman would have the safety and the courage and the support and the healing to then safely report this to human resources. And then human resources would then take it upon themselves to figure out, maybe a white shoe law firm would be pulled in to do an investigation, but the focus would be on trying to figure out whether this producer was guilty or innocent of having broken the policy. Again, in an ideal situation, there was a video camera recording everything that was happening outside of that bathroom, and that tape was available, and it was indeed confirmed that he did exactly what she said he did, and maybe through that investigation it would turn out that there were other incidents of that, and those could be also proven. And once his guilt was established, there would be a decision made by HR, maybe in conjunction with the managing partners, that this person would need to be fired. And then that would take place, and that would be the conventional system working as it should. There was a law that's broken, and then it was enforced, and then that would hopefully deter other people from doing that thing. So as we know, that kind of story doesn't happen very often. And right from the get-go, there was a pretty astounding statistic in Zoe Scamon's piece from the 2018 UK Time 2 survey of the ad industry in Great Britain, that 83 people who said they had been sexually harassed or assaulted did not report it. 83%. So most cases were not reported, and most of the time, because like in that situation, the person who did the harm was senior to the person who experienced the harm, and so they were afraid of retaliation or reporting it affecting their career. And this is so common and very, very well understood. And down the line, it was unlikely that there would be hard and fast proof of guilt. Usually what would happen is the person accused of doing the harm would deny that it happened, and often attack the person bringing up the issue. So then injury is compounded by the insult after, doubly, triply so. Often it's more painful than the initial assault. What happens afterwards, and how people respond or don't respond, and how you become accused of lying, and the attempt to try to discredit you, which we all starting to understand more and more now, what that's like. So restorative justice takes a very, very different approach to each of those bullet points. And so from the beginning, rather than the focus being on the fact that a law or policy has been broken, the focus is on the fact that people and relationships have been harmed, rather than a focus on establishing guilt or innocence, which by its nature, when you create such a binary, are you guilty? Are you a scumbag? Or are you innocent? You're a well-meaning person who may have made a mistake that was misunderstood. It tends, when you have that binary, it also tends to create this defensive mechanism as opposed to a reflective mechanism. So when we focus on the needs of the person that was harmed and reflect on what the obligations are, all of our obligations to that fact, that person is a part of our community and we have a relationship with that person, including the person that did the harm. We look to that, there may be more possibility for responding in a healing way. Instead of accountability being a punishment that is done to the person who is just passively then potentially a victim of that punishment, accountability is an active process of people who have been responsible for the harm taking place, taking full ownership of their part in what happened. No excuses and rationalizations. And in that, desiring to seek to make amends, to want to make things right, to want to be part of the solution. Finally, in the conventional system, the focus tends to be on the offender. The victims are kind of in the background, again, kind of reinforcing the current power dynamic. In restorative justice, people who were harmed, the people who caused harm, and the community are all central agents in the process. And restorative justice facilitators, we only support the people who were most directly affected by the harm to restore, to address, to redress, to imagine futures and put those futures into reality. So that is what the North Star of the compass of restorative justice is. It's about healing, and it's about relationship, and it's about empowerment and everyone playing a part in justice. So, as I said, restorative justice asks more questions than it has answers. I'm not going to get into the slides so much right now, but it's all to say that in order to answer these questions, a community has to exist, and that takes time, and that's part of why the existence of this community, one that has been evolving and growing over the last 10 years, is so important. Because in order to actually ask questions like these, you have to already have some amount of trust, some amount of safety, respect, shared understanding, and a healthy enough power dynamic to even really approach these questions in a meaningful way. And so that when harm occurs, these questions can be approached. And this brings me back to the primary purpose of this talk, which is an invitation to you or someone you know to reach out to me if you fall into one of the categories that I mentioned earlier. If you are someone who's been harmed and you think that restorative justice could be a part of your healing, please email me. If you are someone who saw or knows someone who was harmed and you want to play a role in a restorative justice process, you want to move from being a bystander to being an upstander, please email me. Third category, and this will be the most challenging ask. If you are someone, or if you know someone who's harmed someone else, please let them know about this pilot project and share with them my email. But if you're listening right now, if you're out there and you know you've caused harm and you want to take full accountability, and you have enough self-respect and courage and trust in your fellow humans and in the possibility of a process that could be a path for full redemption and participation and healing, please reach out. Please reach out. And it's most likely that if you're that person, you don't have much of a clue as to how that could happen. You may not fully believe that it could happen. And that's completely understandable. If you reach out to me completely confidentially, of course, it would just indicate that you're willing to open the door. You're willing to open the door. Because for restorative justice to work, as you can see from the slide, it requires that third bullet point. It requires people who want to take accountability, to have real ownership with no minimization or rationalizations or half-truths, like the full truth, and who are willing to believe that it's possible to make things right. So I feel that it is, even for me, you know, it's still one of those things, even though I've seen this happen and I know it can happen, and I can still get cynical about it. So I'm going to just share a couple pieces of an artistic project that you can find online. It's called It Was Me, and it's connected to a documentary about a survivor of domestic abuse who sat down with the person who abused her, and they had a process where he took full accountability. So this art project is a companion piece, and it was crowdsourced from questions from women who had experienced domestic violence, and then 6 men who had used domestic violence against their partners attempted to respond to these questions. And these men participated in some group therapy and are working actively to take full responsibility for the harm they caused. So there is some raw dialogue, and again, please take care of yourself and really ask yourself if this is something that you're willing and able to listen to right now. But if you do decide to listen, hopefully it will give you some fertilization in your imagination about what is possible in terms of taking accountability.
It's sad that we haven't created a way to talk about this.
Yeah. There's just not a lot of conversation about how are we supposed to talk about it when we've hurt each other.
You have to be able to say it out loud. It's a very hard thing for even a child to say.
Articulating something is terrifying because it makes it real. But, I mean, like, I do think that that's the only way that you can move past it. It's a terrifying step.
He was never willing to name his behavior for what it was. The reason that people would use language like admit it, the reason I would use that language is because it's like, not just tell me what you did, but like, tell me that you know it was wrong to do what you did. Like, say what you did and then face those words and try and tell me that it wasn't wrong.
My own feelings of frustration, my own feelings of self-worth or lack of self-worth have played a huge part in my abuse. I get a feeling of frustration, and the more frustrated I get, the louder I talk. Then it turns into name calling, screaming in face, yelling, pushing. I've pushed my wife before against something I'm not proud of. You try to justify things. You try to say, well, at least I didn't, punch her or beat her up or whatever, things that you've seen. It evolved into where it was a lot more pushback. And then the more pushback I got, then the farther I would have to take it to get it to stop, because I have to win. Every man has to win every conversation, because that's what everybody wants to do.
Accountability is such a difficult thing to define, because on the one hand, it's like, it's important that whoever experienced the harm, that they have a role in defining like what accountability should look like, right? But at the same time, don't make this my burden to figure out how you need to make yourself responsible for this.
Everyone in our program calls you on your shit. Like, if I say something that's misogynistic, if I'm trying to explain a situation and I like try to justify it or diminish or blame, like, someone immediately will interrupt me and say, you're lying to us, you're lying to yourself right now. But I've also been doing things the Anishinaabe way. Like, I've been doing purification lodges every month, like a sweat lodge, as well as like spending time with elders, talking about this and like working through it in some ways that they've been suggesting. So my partner, I just broke up, and it's still really fresh and it's really raw, but it feels good to break up with someone not because you're being abusive, and like not be like I've left behind like a lot of trauma. It feels so stupid. It's like I'm giving myself a gold star for achieving like the bare minimum of like not treating people like shit.
I had to take responsibility for my own stuff. And I ended up on the Navajo reservation to see some elders, to see some medicine people. And that's where the journey began. When I took responsibility, I just talked about what I did, not about what anybody else did or what influenced me. Alcohol, drugs, whatever. None of that stuff. I said, it was me. I did that. And you're ashamed to put it out there because you've never done it before. And you're sitting in a group and say, what's your experience? And these guys, they have a hard time getting there. But when they do open it up, slowly they start to feel a little bit better. It takes time. A lot of men don't know these things are out there. They just think that, there's only help for the women, but there are help for guys too. There's lots of help for guys. There's help out there for men. But the men need to come forward. They need to begin to say, yes, I want to change. Some guys, they say, there's no way you can change me. This is just the way I am. I grew up this way. I've seen it all my life. That's just the way it is. But it's not. That's not the way it is. There is change. There is hope.
So I want to say that if you do choose to reach out to me, it doesn't mean you're agreeing to be part of a process. It doesn't mean you're agreeing to anything. It just means you're opening the door to learning more. I'd like to say a little bit about this project and where we are. right now we don't even actually have funding to hold an entire process. We have drafted a preliminary design for a process that would take a year or more to complete, and you might gather from this talk and from what was just shared that it's a long process to go from harm to full accountability to collective healing, but it's worth trying. And so we have a design, an outline of a design that includes restorative circles, that based in part on the hidden water model, and it also includes vicarious restorative justice circles, which I'll say a little bit more later. And I'm going to start sharing my screen again. This is an image of the Syracuse Peacemaking Center. It's an entire center designed to hold restorative processes, and this is an image of a peacemaking circle, which is a crucial aspect of this particular design. And also, aspect of what we're proposing is to apply this framework that's been adapted from the hidden water work with childhood sexual abuse, and try to apply it to other contexts. And it's essentially a framework that that believes in the mutual interconnection of the person who was harmed and their healing journey, and the person who's done harm and their healing journey, mutually reinforcing each other. But I won't go too much into that now, but basically we believe that the Me Too movement reflects a sea change in survivors of sexual harm speaking out, and most importantly, being heard and believed. It's incredible, and I think we've all experienced the impact of that on our lives. And at the same time, there's something that's still sorely missing, which is people who've done harm actually being able to take accountability. And even less, people wanting and being able to make amends. So the Restorative Justice Initiative, ampersand's Restorative Justice, which I'll tell you more about, 3% movement, we want to work with you, with a community of people, to figure out how to change that, how to bring about people being able to step in to that responsibility of owning what you've done and making things right. So just very quickly, that's me with shorter hair. These are some of the facilitators. Margie Navarro, she comes from Support New York, which is a transformative justice collective, amazing organization. Eric Shanks, a colleague of mine at Hidden Water. Emmanuel Noble Williams from the Transformational Prison Project. He's in the lower right corner there. That is a restorative justice project that brings victims of violent crimes into dialogue with the people who harmed them, who are serving time in prison. Ugo Machuca, who's in the upper right, who is someone who is also a circle keeper and a restorative justice facilitator, very dedicated, who's also formerly incarcerated. Emmanuel was also formerly incarcerated, and has worked with people in prison, people transitioning out of prison, and who also comes with depth of knowledge around First Nations practices, healing practices. Ampersand's Restorative Justice. Alyssa Ackerman coined the term vicarious restorative justice, and she's its pioneer. She's a criminologist. She's also a rape survivor. And in 2016, she began participating in what she now calls vicarious restorative justice sessions when a colleague of hers asked her to speak to a group of incarcerated men who were in treatment and who'd been convicted of sexual offenses. And this experience was profoundly healing for Alyssa and for the men, and thus was born vicarious restorative justice. And Alyssa has a TED Talk where she powerfully tells her story and how vicarious restorative justice came to be. Alexis Sardina is another co-founder of this group, and she's also a survivor and a criminologist. I'm going to now, though, move to Kevin Lynch for the sake of time. Again, just a heads up that what I'm about to share might be triggering for some of you, so please take care of yourself. But Kevin Lynch is the third founder of Ampersands, and in 2016, he wrote a piece on the Huffington Post. And this was right after the Access Hollywood tapes of Donald Trump were released. And he described his history of having victimized women. And he wrote, the beginning of the article starts, I hate saying this. I hate what saying this says about me. And then he says, but I'm just like him. I did it too. And this was Kevin's, I would say, very courageous attempt to open a conversation about men taking responsibility for the harm that of their actions and for the abuse and violence. And Alyssa read this post, reached out to him, they got into a dialogue, and then in 2018, Kevin asked Alyssa to organize a restorative justice process so that he could be held accountable. He could take accountability and be held accountable by others, survivors, for having committed a rape in 1978. So this was a facilitated circle process, and all of the women who participated reported that their healing was furthered by taking part in this. So this is all to say that change is possible, and that change is, in my view, all of our responsibility. So that if what we need more of in this world is accountability, and we want to see more people taking accountability for their actions, not just in sexual harassment context, but in so many ways that that real harm is being done to each other and to this planet. If we want more accountability, we can be the change that makes that happen. And this Audre Lorde quote, I think, is so powerful. She says, change is the immediate responsibility of each of us, wherever and however we are standing, in whatever arena we choose. So this is an invitation, and it would be obviously just a choice. I would never want anyone to feel coerced or pressured into taking part in something like this. But if you already feel a desire, if anything that I've shared has resonated in your heart and in your spirit, in your conscience, in any way, and you want to learn more, please reach out. Powerful quote from James Baldwin. He said, what I'm trying to get at is the question of responsibility. I didn't drop the bomb. that killed 4 black schoolgirls in Birmingham. And I never lynched anybody. Yet I am responsible not for what has happened, but for what can happen. So I agree with James Baldwin, and I feel, again, in my own healing journey, that empowering myself, making myself an agent in my own healing and in seeking justice was part of the transformation from seeing myself as only a victim and seeing myself as a creator, an owner, an author of my life. And in the absence of that, what's left is being a victim of my circumstance. And I definitely found that when I perceive life in that way and I act in that way, I simply recreate what already is. When I'm able to step into the power which is actually available to me, then I become a creator of my own future. And so if any of those questions that were part of the description of this talk speaks to you, calls to you, your sense of justice, your sense of hope, your sense of what is possible in terms of healing and in terms of community. If you want to join us in asking these questions, what if justice was everyone's responsibility? We're here. This is my email address. Again, anything you share will be kept confidential. And you can share as much or as little as you choose. And we can go from there. I'd like now to show a short little video of Alyssa speaking about her journey as a way to end this talk and to illustrate a little bit about what's possible on the other side of healing.
So I believe that every single person who experienced sexual violence or victimization has the capacity to heal, to survive, and to thrive. What that looks like for me is staying in this career, continuing on as a professor and a researcher and a teacher while being open about that label. It meant no longer hiding. It meant no more shame, no more guilt, understanding that I was 0% responsible for this, but also acknowledging some of the long-term effects. I still have moments where I'm really sad. I still experience flashbacks, and I'm okay with that. I've come to accept that that's a part of the journey. I think that the journey is lifelong. I think the journey always continues, but I know how to walk that journey. I know how to deal with those things as they come up now, and that's part of resilience. The other part of this that I see is just the hope that you can come out the other side of this and be strong and not be ashamed of this and be able to say, me too.
I'll just end with one final quote from Peter Block, who writes, "To be accountable is to care for the well-being of the whole and act as if this well-being is in our hands and our hearts to create. This kind of accountability is created through the conversations we have with each other." I invite you to reach out to me. I invite you to continue this conversation. Thank you so much for your time and your care.